Hello all and welcome, and I am the MGTOW philosopher. And in this video I want to talk about feminism and how it was never meant to be about equality, but instead has always been about superiority. Now yes, equality was indeed the goal of some of the useful idiots who pushed and still push for feminism in today's society. However, it was not created with the idea of gaining equality. No, it was never about that. Even for those who believe in equality, that isn't what they're trying to push. No, they're pushing superiority. And if you look more closely, you'll see that it could never have been about equality in the first place. Why is that? Why? Because men and women are not equal. They can only be made equal by two methods. One, making men less equal through artificial means, i.e. government interference and social engineering. And two, by making women more equal via the same means. Now, if you do this, you automatically make women superior in society by introducing a reductive bias toward men and an additive bias towards women. Essentially, the system must become all about improving women, helping women, while actively reducing men to make them less than they are, so that women can become more equal to men than they actually are. Now, in doing this, you cannot have two equal groups, because the interests of one group must be favored over the other to make up for any shortfalls. Hence, the other group must be disenfranchised and made inferior. This is an unavoidable consequence, as it's the only way you can go about trying, notice I say trying, to achieve equality. Because in reality, you cannot achieve it, because the two are not equal. And the only thing that ends up happening when you alter the system to such an extent to try and make them equal is that one group will gain dominance over the other. It's unavoidable. For you see, the differences in the two are simply too great. So the changes required to achieve parity between the two are also too great. So in turn, the resulting system will massively favor one group over the other. This is always what happens when you try and enforce artificial equality. The system alters itself to try and make up for any perceived shortcomings that one group so that one group can catch up to the other, so they can become equal. But the problem is it never happens, because they are in no way naturally equal. Hence, the only way to achieve some kind of equality is by artificial means, far beyond simply making one group the best that it can be. Meaning that the system must operate under the false premise that equality is an achievable goal. What? Equality hasn't been achieved yet? Well, we just aren't trying hard enough. We have to introduce more programs to make women better students. They need to be made stronger, confident, more competitive. We've tried to make them want more of the things that men want, but for some reason that just isn't working very well. But that's not our fault. That just means that the patriarchy is real and it's actively opposing us. Hence, we as feminists must lobby more and more to introduce more programs that benefit women, because equality still doesn't exist yet because of that damn patriarchy. And equality of outcome is what they're talking about, mind you. That's what they're talking about, equalizing outcomes, because that's what equality is all about with feminists. Not equality of opportunity, which is what they already have. No, they want equality of outcome. For example, let us say you're a woman who wants to be, a professional boxer, who wants to fight men. Is that opportunity available to you? No, of course not, because that is impossible, as men and women are not equal. Yet, that is what's happening in Western society every day. We have the government putting women into the same sphere as men and then asking them to compete at the same level. And they can't. Yet for some reason, the government doesn't see that this is no different than sending a woman into a ring to fight a man. However, lack of equality between the two is less obvious in the white-collar workplace, as of course women tend to gravitate towards jobs that deal with paper shuffling, intellectual endeavors, and less physical activities. Because in the physical spectrum, the differences are far too obvious. And the fact that they cannot compete and do the job as well as a man, well, it can't be hidden so easily. She'd lose her job almost immediately under such circumstances. That's why you don't see many women in jobs like working on skyscrapers or collecting garbage. They simply can't do these jobs. Wait a second, what? They can't do them? But I thought they were equal. They also can't do most jobs as well as men. Of course, the way you solve that is to hire less men, which is the case nowadays, as most human resources departments are almost entirely peopled with women. That's one of the key goals of feminists, to control the key areas of hiring in the workplace and thereby promote artificial equality, as you're the ones that are doing the hiring. Of course, even in offices and white-collar jobs, what ends up happening is the woman is less productive than the man. However, since she can still do some of the work, no one does any comparisons to see if she is as productive as her male counterparts. And whatever work she doesn't do, meaning isn't able to do, well, that just ends up being done by a man. This picking up of the slack is part of how the system hides women's innate inequality and also makes women more privileged. After all, if I'm doing more work and you're doing less, then how are you, not at the very least, more privileged than I am? If I, as a man, were to be less productive, I'd lose my job. But since you're a woman, you get to do less, and I serve you by doing the work you can't. That sure sounds like privileged and superior to me, not oppressed. This picking up of the slack, it happens everywhere women work alongside men. You especially see it in jobs where there's a possible physical requirement, but in reality, you'll spend the majority of your time waiting for something to happen, like policemen or firemen. Most of their job is sitting on their butts until something happens. Then when that something does happen, you won't see the female firemen loading those 80-pound oxygen tanks onto the truck. Oh no. And if a police department hasn't lost its mind and swallowed the leftist Kool-Aid entirely, they won't have any female officers patrolling the streets without a male partner, as they'd likely be killed by even the weakest man that they tried to arrest. Same goes for the military, where women cannot even get into the military without dumbing down the standards. And to get into elite military regiments like the Rangers is wholly impossible for women, without a lot of extra help, of course, as well as, again, heavily dumbing down the standards and offering unlimited attempts to pass. I made a series of videos about the few women that got through Ranger School where I outlined why it was a complete and utter hoax. I suggest you watch them. In truth, men are almost always more productive than women. In most cases, women, they simply ride the coattails of men, all the while doing what they can, but rarely is it as much as a man. But we must strive to make them equal, as if such a thing was really possible. We must do all we can to embrace this idea, of course. However, if we have to do all this work to make them equal and it still hasn't happened, are we not simply creating an illusion of equality, which means it's not a real thing in the first place? The only equality that can be guaranteed is equality of opportunity. That means that you as a person have a chance to show that you can do a job, and if you cannot, you don't get the job. What equality of outcome means is that even if you lack the ability or the qualifications to get a job, you'll get hired anyway because either a quota needs to be filled or the employer didn't want to get sued or harassed by feminists for not hiring a woman instead of a man. Therefore, equality of outcome is very unfair. Because if someone who is unqualified gets a job, what that means is that it won't go to someone who is actually qualified. And that qualified person is the one who deserves the job. Yes, deserves. Now that's unfairness. Unfairness that the left is supposed to be against. But of course they aren't. They just want to be superior to everyone else who is actually objectively superior to them. For example, those who possess greater strength, intelligence, drive, and ambition. People who became superior by determination and hard work. Of course, in the eyes of the left, it is those people who cannot be allowed to flourish, as it makes unsuccessful leftists feel bad about themselves. And of course, feelings are everything, and feelings are reality. And it also inspires their envy. While at the same time, it makes some of the more successful people who have been indoctrinated into leftist groupthink, well, it makes them feel self-hate and guilt over their own success, as if they are successful, at least in part, because of some illicit white privilege they received. What nonsense. Yes, it's always the white man, isn't it? This, of course, is cultural Marxism, which is really all feminism is. Envy of those who have more and have it better than you. Whether or not they worked harder than you, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, honestly, if you had had their privileges, you could have been just as successful, right? If you'd have been white, you'd be just as successful, wouldn't you? Or even more so. Yeah, right. And of course, even though you don't have their success, if you'd have just been born them, yeah, even though You don't seem to understand that you have more privilege than they do as a woman or a minority, as white men don't have affirmative action programs or quotas. And even though most of the politicians who are white men, they only favor the people who make up the majority of voters, which is women and minorities. So how are white men in any way privileged, and why aren't you more successful than them? Could it be that success, at least in most cases, doesn't come from so-called privileges? But that's a subject for another video, I think. Now let me just say that I'm all for equality of opportunity. I think women should and already do have the opportunities available to be whatever they want to be if it's possible. However, if you have a system that favors one group over another in an attempt to achieve equality, what you'll end up with won't be fair or equal in any way, shape, or form. In regards to opportunities, the results will be less equality for men, because if you must artificially change the means of how things naturally occur, you must therefore engineer the system to favor the less equal people in it, thereby making the system itself less equal as a whole. However, most feminists simply cannot accept that some areas of study just don't interest the majority of women. Oh no, it isn't that women don't have the same fundamental interest as men. No, it's simply that men are systematically oppressing women and discouraging them from going into certain fields because they want to control those key areas. Hence, feminists must do more to battle this by encouraging more women to enter these fields that only men are in. And of course, it's only because of men that they're not in those fields. That's how men want it. Not because that's simply something women, by and large, don't want to do. Oh, no, it couldn't be that. Funny how women are always trying more to get into STEM fields, but they're not trying to be garbage women and female sewer cleaners. You know, since there are no real differences between men and women, nor between the types of jobs men and women want to do, that's what the feminists tell you, at least. I guess the patriarchy is keeping women out of those jobs as well. They're keeping women out of the garbage collecting industry and the sewer cleaning industry and the plumbing industry. Strange that I don't see any feminists complaining about lack of women in these totally male-dominated fields such as garbage collection. I guess it's because women don't want to do those jobs. Wait, what? Doesn't that contradict the feminist argument in this regard? I think that's another video as well, so I'll digress on that. Anyhow, what feminists end up doing in regards to this perceived oppression is to plot new ways to get women into these jobs, minus garbage collecting and other distasteful jobs, of course. There are not very many female scientists. Well, let's create some scholarships for women so they can pursue sciences more. Let's create specific scholarships just for women who are going into science. Also, let's push classes in gender studies so we can create a hostile environment in universities for men and thereby encourage hatred of men. Let's also push the rape narrative, the rape culture narrative that further engenders hatred of men within both men and women. Yeah, let's make those men really hate themselves. Ooh, yeah, because self-haters are the most useful idiots of all, don't you know? Furthermore, let's push a societal narrative that women need to be in the sciences more. Let's push the narrative in the media that there's a bias against women, that women are being denied jobs in STEM fields, and tell them that they need to pursue these jobs as a service to all womankind. Yeah, don't live for yourself, ladies. Live for the collective. That way, we will get more women into these areas, and things will be more equal. Again, it's funny that there's no push for equality in the realm of garbage collecting or plumbing. Meanwhile, women as a whole will be less happy, of course, but the global elites don't care about that. The academics and the so-called intellectuals who peddle this nonsense, they don't care either. Their agendas are being pushed, and that's all that matters to them. You might also notice that everything which feminists accuse men of doing, they themselves actually do. You see, there's no patriarchy, but there's most certainly a matriarchy. This is an old leftist trick. It's an old trick, period, really. You see, what you do is accuse your enemy of doing what you're doing, and since you're arguing that your enemy is the one guilty of this, they're so busy defending themselves that they and everyone else is so focused on your accusations that they often miss the fact that you are doing what you're accusing others of doing. As I said, it's an old projection trick that the left uses very well. though it works best on leftists, as others who are not indoctrinated into their way of thinking tend to see through this ruse. It's usually only those on the left, not on the left, usually those on the left, that miss it, as they lack real self-awareness or critical thinking skills. So leftists tend to miss this trick. It's designed for leftists. People who ain't leftists see through it, but, it's not meant to attract them. Now, ideologues have one goal, and that's for their ideology to become fact. They are zealots and are so committed to the righteousness of their ideas that no one can tell them otherwise. They are right and you are wrong if you're not for them and their ideals. And those are the people we have in charge of America right now and many Western nations at this time. Ideologues bent on global collectivist agendas. And that's why some of us ask the question, how can these people not see reason? How can they not see that what they're doing and saying is total, utter nonsense? Well, they don't see it because ideologues are true believers. The only nonsense is that which opposes them. They can't think for themselves, understand? So they are not going to analyze much of anything. They've been indoctrinated into a way of thinking that makes them impervious to logic and reason. So you are the only one speaking nonsense, not them. They're making rational, logical sense, even though they don't actually know what logic and rationale are. But they are right anyway, and you are wrong because you don't agree with them. That's it. So you see, gentlemen, the only loser here is you, and only if you're a white man, of course, because you have the resources that they want. You know, there's a reason you don't hear about feminism rising up in Africa or Middle Eastern countries. They're too poor. There's nothing there to steal. I talk about this in my video, Why the Left Doesn't Care About Africa. I suggest you watch it. It's only in the West where the evil white man rules. Only in those places will you find feminism. For you see, feminism is not a real movement. It's a fake movement created to conquer countries. It was only introduced to the West and funded by wealthy puppets and useful fools so as to bring about a certain socialist collectivist agenda. And that agenda can only be achieved from a position of superiority. Groups that are equal in every way, they don't take each other over, with one then ending up ruling over the other. No. That can only be done, can only be achieved from a position of authority. You see, equality has never been the goal. It was never the goal to begin with, because it's an impossible goal that can never be achieved, and it was designed with that in mind. You know, feminism was perhaps one of the finest tools ever created for conquering nations. Pit the men against the women, and use the women's total lack of parity with a man and the fact that she will never ever be able to achieve it as a point of contention between the sexes. Women will always, forever claim to be put upon and oppressed because the equality that they've been fighting for so long, it never, ever is fully achieved, which of course means there are forces actively trying to oppose them, and so the fight must continue. All the while, women gain more and more and more power as the system twists itself to try and accommodate them and grant them the total equality that they have come to believe they deserve. Because the underlying premise is that women are equal to men, and that premise has been accepted as fact. But they really aren't, and they cannot be equal to a man, and no amount of artificial manipulation will change that. Not in this case, anyway. Hence, it was a movement designed to never be able to be completed. Its stated goal could never be reached because the goal itself is unachievable. It's a movement with an end game that will never end. And that was the plan from the start. Never stop fighting. Never give up. Make people believe this false premise. Thereby, the logical conclusion must be that there is systemic sexism, racism, whatever ism, so the system must be changed. Yet the real goal is the systematic dismantling of the system. Dismantling and reshaping it to serve a collectivist agenda. For that is all feminism really is. Collectivism, Marxism, feminism, they are all one and the same ism. All of them were created to make everyone equal, which can't happen, of course. So they instead become superior, or should I say, the idea of equality eventually becomes superior. And those people who were superior for a time, They won't stay that way. Once the system collapses and fully embraces the equality which they so wanted, at that point, everyone will become disenfranchised. Then and only then will they see the truth, these useful idiots of the world. But by then, it'll be way too late. The underlying premise is false. So any and all logic based upon that premise is also false. Equality between the sexes cannot ever be achieved, but that was the point. A battle that will never end until Western civilization falls. And that is the real goal of feminism, because no other goal is possible. I am the MGTOW philosopher, and I wish you well. Take care.